Pour your richest blessings on my family here. Bring peace to every home, healing to every soul, and wrap my precious sisters, mothers, and daughters in your endless love. May joy never leave their doors. Amen. My family, every story I share is a piece of my heart. I don't write for numbers. I write to give you comfort, love, and truth. When some leave halfway, it hurts me deeply because it feels like my hard work and sleepless nights mean nothing. Yet I still promise to give you the best stories of your life. The biggest strength of my life is Binta. Her love and wisdom made me the man you hear today. And to my new family members, please don't doubt me. Ask those who've been with me since the beginning. They know Mr. Peter never plays with your heart. I've also created a new channel, Mr. Peter Family, for shorter stories under 1 hour. You'll find the link in my community post. Please subscribe and stay till the end. Because this family is built on love, not leaving. If your heart is true, right, present. If your love is real, right, I am with Mr. Peter. Love strikes like lightning in autumn, transforming everything it touches into gold, but even the most precious metal can tarnish when exposed to the wrong elements. In the golden autumn of 1995, when Chicago's magnificent skyline gleamed against the endless expanse of Lake Michigan, 28-year-old Robert Redford first encountered 26-year-old Viola Davis in the hushed corridors of the Art Institute. She stood before a breathtaking Monet masterpiece, her ebony skin luminous beneath the gallery's carefully orchestrated lighting, her presence both commanding and graceful. Robert, an ambitious real estate developer whose dreams exceeded his current financial means, found himself unable to draw breath. "The greatest masterpieces," Viola said without turning, somehow sensing his presence in the reverent silence behind her, "were painted not with eyes alone, but with hearts that understood, suffering and joy in equal measure." Robert stepped closer, his pulse thundering in his ears like Lake Michigan waves against the shore. "Perhaps true artistry lies not in what we observe, but in what we feel deep within our souls," he replied, his voice barely rising above the whispered conversations of other gallery visitors. When Viola turned, her eyes, deep pools of warmth that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom, met his startling blue gaze. And Robert knew with absolute certainty that his existence had just been divided into 2 distinct chapters. Everything before this extraordinary moment, and everything that would follow in its wake. Their courtship unfolded with the deliberate beauty of a perfectly composed symphony, each movement more enchanting than the last. Robert would arrive at Viola's modest apartment bearing handwritten sonnets tucked beneath her windshield wipers, verses that compared her laughter to spring, rain, and her smile to the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon. She, an accomplished elementary school teacher with a master's degree in education and dreams of transforming young lives, would surprise him with elaborate picnic lunches in Grant Park, spreading hand-stitched quilts beneath towering oak trees. While reading aloud from Langston Hughes and Maya Angelou, "You make me believe in magic again," she whispered one crisp October evening as they danced on the rooftop of his modest 3-room apartment, the entire city twinkling below them like scattered diamonds against black velvet. Robert pursued Viola with the focused intensity of a man who had discovered his destiny. He appeared at her elementary school with fresh bouquets of her favorite flowers, completely indifferent to the delighted giggles and whispered comments of her curious students. He memorized every poem she had ever mentioned loving, reciting them during their long evening walks along the lakefront, when autumn gave way to winter's embrace. When December brought Chicago's first serious snowfall, he would arrive before dawn to warm her car and scrape ice from her windshield, wanting nothing more than to see her grateful smile illuminate the grey morning. "I have never experienced love like this," Viola confessed one snowy December evening as they sat before the crackling fireplace in Robert's small living room. It feels as though you have awakened something in my soul that I never knew existed." "You are my soul," Robert replied with fierce conviction, taking her delicate hands in his larger ones. "Everything I am, everything I aspire to become, begins and ends with you." Their wedding ceremony in June 1996 was intimate yet magnificent. Exactly 50 guests gathered in the small stone chapel on Chicago's South Side, where Viola's family had worshipped faithfully for 3 generations. Robert's mother wept tears of pure joy as she welcomed Viola into their family with open arms, while Viola's beloved grandmother, the dignified 87-year-old Rose Davis, placed her weathered hands upon both their bowed heads and blessed their union in a voice that carried the accumulated wisdom of nearly 9 decades. "May your love grow stronger with each passing season," Grandma Rose intoned, her warm palms resting gently on their heads. "May you always remember that true wealth is measured not by what you possess, but by how deeply you cherish one another." The reception celebration was held in Viola's childhood backyard, which had been transformed into an enchanted garden, complete with hundreds of twinkling string lights and colorful paper lanterns swaying gently in the summer breeze. Robert surprised his new bride by hiring a renowned jazz quartet to perform her favorite songs, and when they played the timeless classic At Last, he drew Viola into his arms and sang softly in her ear, his voice trembling with overwhelming emotion. "I love you beyond the power of words," he murmured as they swayed together in perfect harmony. "Beyond logic, beyond reason, beyond time itself." "And I love you," she replied, her fingertips tracing the strong line of his jaw, "with every breath in my body and every beat of my heart." Their first year of marriage was a magnificent tapestry, woven with countless golden threads of happiness and wonder. Robert would wake each morning to discover little notes from Viola, carefully tucked into his leather briefcase, tender reminders of her unwavering love, enthusiastic encouragement for his expanding business ventures, and small poems, written in her elegant handwriting that captured the essence of their daily joys. She would surprise him with romantic candlelit dinners when his work kept him late at the office, appearing unexpectedly with homemade meals prepared with love and that radiant smile that could brighten even the darkest, most challenging day. Their conversations flowed like music, covering everything from philosophy to dreams, from childhood memories to plans for their future together. Every evening brought new discoveries about each other, deepening their connection beyond what either had thought possible. Weekend mornings found them lingering in bed, sharing coffee and newspaper sections, while discussing the world outside their perfect bubble of contentment. "You are destined to conquer this entire city," she would tell him, her faith in his abilities absolutely unwavering, "and I will stand proudly beside you through every step of the journey." Robert's real estate business began to flourish remarkably, partly due to his natural entrepreneurial talent, and partly because Viola's complete belief in his capabilities gave him the confidence to take carefully calculated risks that other developers avoided. They would spend peaceful evenings planning their shared future, dreaming of the loving family they would build together and the lasting legacy they would leave for future generations. On their first wedding anniversary in June 1997, Robert surprised Viola with a romantic weekend getaway to Paris. They strolled hand in hand along the Seine River at sunset, explored the magnificent halls of the Louvre, and made passionate love in a luxurious room overlooking the illuminated Eiffel Tower. It was there, in the legendary City of Light, that they conceived their son. When they returned to Chicago, their love seemed to deepen and strengthen even further. Robert would place his hands tenderly on Viola's growing belly and whisper heartfelt promises to their unborn child. "You are going to be so incredibly loved," he would say, "so completely cherished." The pregnancy brought them closer than they had ever imagined possible. Robert attended every single doctor's appointment, read pregnancy books with scholarly dedication, and prepared the nursery with meticulous care. He personally painted the walls a soft, cheerful yellow, since they had chosen to keep their baby's gender a wonderful surprise, and assembled the handcrafted crib with his own hands. Determined that everything should be absolutely perfect for their child. What if I proved to be an inadequate father? He confessed to Viola one winter night in January 1997, his vulnerability showing through his usual confident exterior. "You will be absolutely amazing," she assured him with complete conviction, taking his hand and placing it gently on her rounded belly. "Our baby is already incredibly fortunate to have you." Christopher Robert Redford was born on a snowy February morning in 1997, weighing exactly 7 pounds and 2 ounces, blessed with his father's piercing blue eyes and his mother's perfectly shaped mouth. Robert wept openly when he first held his son, overwhelmed by a love so fierce and immediate that it literally took his breath away. "He is absolutely perfect," Robert whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Completely perfect." The early days with baby Christopher were filled with wonder and exhaustion in equal measure. Robert would wake for the middle-of-the-night feedings, insisting that Viola rest while he bonded with their son. He would rock Christopher for hours, singing lullabies in his deep voice and telling him stories about the bright future they would build together as a family. "Someday, son," Robert would whisper as Christopher slept peacefully in his arms. "You will have everything your heart desires, but most importantly, you will always know how deeply you are loved." Little did any of them know that perfection, like the most delicate crystal, appears unbreakable until the moment it shatters. And, when it does, the sharpest pieces always cut deepest those who once held it closest to their hearts. Chapter 2. The Beautiful Marriage Moments. In the garden of love, the most beautiful flowers bloom in perfect splendor just before the hurricane arrives to destroy everything in its path. The years following Christopher's birth in February 1997 were painted in shades of pure gold, each passing season bringing new reasons for the Redford family to celebrate their extraordinary bond. As baby Christopher grew into a delightful toddler, the modest house that Robert had purchased in Lincoln Park became a sanctuary of laughter, learning, and unconditional love. By his first birthday, in February 1998, Christopher was walking steadily and speaking in clear sentences that amazed visitors and family members alike. Robert would spend countless hours on their living room floor, building elaborate block towers, for one-year-old Christopher to demolish with squeals of delight. Each collapse was met with thunderous applause from his adoring parents, who marveled at their son's obvious intelligence and infectious joy. The family had established cherished routines that centered around Christopher's needs, while nurturing the deep connection between husband and wife. "Did you see how precisely he calculated that angle?" Robert would exclaim to Viola, genuine amazement filling his voice as he watched their toddler topple another carefully constructed tower. "This boy possesses remarkable problem-solving abilities for his age." Their home had become the neighborhood, gathering place for young families, with Robert and Viola hosting regular barbecues and holiday celebrations that brought together friends, colleagues, and extended family members. Christopher charmed every guest with his precocious vocabulary and endearing personality, often becoming the center of attention despite his young age. Sunday mornings had evolved into sacred family rituals that none of them would have traded for any amount of money or professional success. Robert would wake early to prepare elaborate breakfast feasts, pancakes cut into animal shapes for Christopher, perfectly prepared eggs Benedict for Viola, and strong coffee for himself. They would gather around their kitchen table, Christopher, chattering excitedly in his high chair while his parents discussed their dreams, plans, and the infinite possibilities that seemed to stretch before them. "You spoil us beyond measure," Viola would tease, watching Robert carefully cut Christopher's pancakes into bite-sized pieces while making airplane noises to encourage eating. "It is impossible to spoil the people you love this much," Robert would reply, stealing a quick kiss from his wife while Christopher clapped his tiny hands in delight at his parents' obvious affection. Their evenings together were equally magical and meaningful. After dinner, the family would gather in the living room, where Robert had created a comfortable reading corner complete with soft cushions and excellent lighting. Christopher would play contentedly with his educational toys on the thick carpet, while Robert and Viola curled together on their well-worn sofa, sometimes reading quietly, sometimes planning future adventures, always acutely aware of their incredible good fortune. Robert had maintained his romantic tradition of writing Viola heartfelt love letters, though now they appeared monthly rather than weekly due to his increasing business responsibilities and his desire to spend more time with Christopher. These weren't simple notes of affection, but eloquent declarations of his deepening love and gratitude, carefully sealed and hidden throughout their home for her to discover during quiet moments. She treasured each one, storing them in a beautiful wooden box that grew heavier with sentiment each passing month. "My beloved Viola," one letter from autumn 1998 read, "Watching you nurture our son fills me with wonder at your infinite capacity for love. Christopher's laughter brings me joy, but your happiness remains the music that gives meaning to every day of my existence." Valentine's Day 1999 brought one of Robert's most romantic gestures yet. While Viola believed he was attending a routine business meeting, Robert had actually arranged for a professional photographer to capture candid images of her and 2-year-old Christopher during their afternoon routine. The resulting portraits, mother and son reading together, playing in the garden, sharing quiet moments of affection, became treasured artwork that graced the walls of their home. "You have given me a family beyond my wildest dreams," Robert told Viola that evening as they danced slowly in their living room while Christopher slept peacefully upstairs. "Every day with you feels like a gift I never deserved, but will never take for granted." Their vacation to a lakeside cottage in Wisconsin during the summer of 1999 created memories that would sustain them through the difficult times ahead. 2-year-old Christopher proved to be an adventurous traveler, delighting in feeding ducks, collecting smooth stones along the shoreline, and falling asleep each night exhausted from days filled with exploration and family togetherness. Robert documented every moment with his camera, creating photo albums that captured their perfect happiness. "Best vacation ever," Christopher declared on their final evening, his vocabulary impressive for his age. "Daddy swim, Mama read stories. More. Tomorrow. Oh, we will have many more adventures together," Robert promised, carrying his sleepy son to bed while Viola packed their belongings. "Our family will always come first, no matter what challenges we might face." As they returned to Chicago and settled back into their comfortable routines, none of them could have imagined that these precious moments of perfect happiness were already numbered. The foundation of their beautiful life appeared solid and unshakable, built on love, commitment, and shared dreams that seemed destined to last forever. Christopher's second birthday celebration in February 1999 was a joyous affair attended by family, friends, and neighbors who had come to love the bright, charming little boy. Robert had arranged for a small carnival in their backyard, complete with pony rides, face painting, and enough balloons to delight every child present. As Christopher opened his carefully chosen presents, his parents stood together, watching Their son's excitement with hearts full of gratitude and contentment. "Best birthday," Christopher announced, launching himself into Robert's arms before reaching for Viola, demanding group hugs that left all three of them laughing with pure joy. The transition into the year 2000 found the Redford family at the height of their happiness. Christopher, now approaching his third birthday, displayed remarkable intelligence and emotional maturity for his age. He could count to 50, recognize all letters of the alphabet, and engage in sophisticated conversations that amazed adults. More importantly, he radiated the confidence and security that comes from being deeply loved and consistently nurtured. Robert's business was thriving beyond their original expectations, allowing him to provide comfortable circumstances for his family without sacrificing the time and attention they deserved. He had learned to maintain careful boundaries between work and family, ensuring that business concerns never interfered with bedtime stories, weekend adventures, or quiet moments of connection with Viola and Christopher. Their dinner parties had become legendary among Chicago's young professional community for their warmth and genuine hospitality. Robert's natural charm, combined with Viola's gracious hosting, created an atmosphere where every guest felt welcomed and valued. Even as a toddler, Christopher would make his rounds before bedtime, charming adults with his advanced vocabulary and irresistible smile. "That child possesses extraordinary intelligence," their neighbor Dr. Patricia Williams observed during one gathering in late 1999. "I have never encountered a 2-year-old who demonstrates such sophisticated reasoning, abilities and emotional awareness." Onainin. As winter gave way to spring in 2000, the Redford family appeared to have achieved the perfect balance between professional success and personal fulfillment. Robert's real estate development company was gaining recognition throughout the Midwest. Viola was considering returning to teaching part-time once Christopher started preschool, and their son continued to amaze everyone with his rapid development and sunny disposition. Christopher's third birthday party in February 2000 marked what would later be remembered as the last celebration of their complete family happiness. Robert had transformed their backyard into a winter wonderland, complete with ice sculptures, hot chocolate stations, and entertainment that delighted children and adults alike. As Christopher opened his presents with characteristic enthusiasm, his parents exchanged glances filled with love, pride, and absolute confidence in their shared future. "Thank you, Daddy." "Thank you, Mama," Christopher exclaimed, hugging both parents simultaneously. "Best birthday ever." But even in the brightest sunshine, shadows can suddenly appear, and the Redford family's perfect world was about to discover that some storms arrive without warning, carrying winds strong enough to uproot even the most carefully tended gardens. Chapter 3. Cracks in the Foundation. Success can be the most dangerous drug of all. It promises everything while slowly poisoning the very relationships that made achievement meaningful in the first place. By the spring of 2000, 33-year-old Robert Redford had achieved remarkable success in Chicago's competitive real estate market. His development company controlled valuable properties throughout the metropolitan area, maintained contracts for ambitious projects across the Midwest, and generated revenue that attracted attention from national investors. Business magazines featured his photograph alongside headlines proclaiming him Chicago's rising star and the future of urban development. Yet with each new milestone, something indefinable began to shift in the carefully balanced ecosystem of his family life. The changes manifested gradually, like hairline cracks appearing in the foundation of a building that still looked solid from the outside. Robert began missing family dinners occasionally, explaining these absences as unavoidable consequences of important meetings with potential investors or critical negotiations with city planning officials. 31-year-old Viola would keep his dinner warm in the oven and never voice complaints when he arrived home well after 3-year-old Christopher's bedtime. "I am building something extraordinary for our future," Robert would tell her as he sat down to eat his reheated meal, his tie loosened and exhaustion evident in his eyes. "Every sacrifice we make now will provide Christopher with opportunities we could never have imagined. Udim, we already possess everything that truly matters," Viola would reply gently, though she had begun to notice the way his smile seemed forced and his attention appeared divided even during their most intimate conversations. Christopher, now 3 years old and remarkably perceptive for his age, noticed these changes more acutely than his parents realized. When Robert missed their cherished Saturday morning pancake traditions for the second consecutive week, the little boy asked with heartbreaking directness, "Where'd Daddy go? Christopher want pancakes with Daddy." The question struck Robert like a physical blow, cutting through his justifications and forcing him to confront the reality of his shifting priorities. "Daddy has important work meetings, buddy," he explained, kneeling down to meet Christopher's worried blue eyes. "But we'll have pancakes together very soon." "Promise?" Christopher asked, extending his small pinky finger in the gesture that had become their sacred oath. "Promise," Robert replied, linking his finger with his son's, though even as he spoke the words, he was mentally reviewing his calendar and identifying potential conflicts. The phone calls began arriving at all hours, during bath time, family meals, and bedtime story sessions. Robert would answer every call, convinced that each conversation was essential to maintaining his company's momentum and securing his family's financial future. His explanations became increasingly elaborate as he tried to justify the constant interruptions to their family time. "This Henderson project represents the biggest opportunity of my career," he would tell Viola after ending yet another urgent phone call during dinner. "If we can secure this contract, it will establish our company as a major player in the Chicago market." Viola listened patiently to these explanations, but she couldn't help noticing that there always seemed to be another, biggest opportunity demanding Robert's immediate attention. The pattern was becoming exhaustingly familiar. The breaking point arrived on a humid Tuesday evening in late May 2000. Viola had spent the entire afternoon preparing a special dinner to celebrate their 4th wedding anniversary, setting their dining room table with the finest china they owned, and arranging for Christopher to spend the night with his beloved Grandma Rose. She wore the elegant blue dress Robert had purchased during their Paris honeymoon. The one he claimed made her eyes sparkle like captured starlight. At 7 o'clock, she lit the anniversary candles they had saved from their wedding ceremony. At 8:30, she called his office only to reach his voicemail system. At 9:45, she finally heard his key in the front door, followed by the sound of his voice engaged in animated conversation. But he was not alone. "Give me just 5 minutes to collect those Henderson project documents," Robert was saying to his unseen companion as they entered the foyer. "This development deal is worth $25 million, and timing is absolutely critical for success." Viola appeared at the top of their staircase, her anniversary dress rustling softly against the polished banister. Robert looked up and froze completely, suddenly taking in the romantic scene she had created with such care, watching the hope in her eyes transform rapidly into disappointment and hurt. "I apologize sincerely," he said, his voice strained with what might have been guilt or merely inconvenience. "An urgent situation developed during our meeting. Richard here needs those contracts tonight, or we risk losing the most important opportunity of my entire career." Richard, a sharp-featured man in an expensive charcoal suit, barely acknowledged Viola's presence with a perfunctory nod. "We really must move quickly on this, Robert. Our competition has been making aggressive moves, and delay could prove catastrophic." Viola descended the stairs slowly, her dignity intact, despite the crushing disappointment that threatened to overwhelm her. Composure. "Of course," she said quietly, her voice betraying none of the pain she felt. "Business must always take priority over personal celebrations." After the men departed with their precious documents, Viola sat alone at the beautifully appointed anniversary table, watching the candles burn lower while struggling to hold back tears that would have been both justified and futile. The expensive dinner she had prepared grew cold as she contemplated the distance that seemed to be growing between her and the man she had married with such hope and joy. The pattern escalated dramatically throughout the remainder of 2000. Robert's absences grew longer and more frequent. His explanations became increasingly elaborate and defensive, and his attention grew more fragmented even during the limited time he spent at home. When he was physically present, he seemed restless and distracted, constantly checking his phone and taking calls that he insisted could not wait for more convenient moments. "You used to turn off your phone during Christopher's bath time," Viola observed one evening as Robert answered his fourth call during what had once been sacred family time. "The business has evolved beyond anything I originally envisioned," Robert replied, covering his phone's mouthpiece with obvious impatience. "No, I have responsibilities to investors, employees, and contractors that extend far beyond normal business hours." "What about your responsibilities to your wife and son?" Viola asked, gesturing toward Christopher, who was building elaborate soap sculptures in the bathtub, while stealing hopeful glances at his increasingly distant father. Robert looked genuinely puzzled by the question, as if he could not understand why she would expect his family to receive the same level of dedication and attention that he devoted to his expanding business empire. The late-night phone calls became more frequent and significantly more secretive. Robert would step onto their bedroom balcony or retreat to his home office, speaking in hushed tones about matters he claimed were too complex or confidential to discuss with someone outside the industry. When Viola asked about his day or tried to engage him in meaningful conversation, his answers became frustratingly vague and dismissive. "You would not understand the intricacies involved," became his standard response to her attempts at connection. "These are complicated business matters that would not interest someone without industry experience." Viola had always been Robert's most trusted confidant and advisor, despite her background in education rather than real estate. His suddenly patronizing attitude felt like a betrayal of the partnership they had built together over 4 years of marriage. Christopher began exhibiting behavioral problems at his preschool, with teachers reporting that the previously well-adjusted child was becoming aggressive with classmates and withdrawn during group activities. When Viola mentioned these concerning developments to Robert, he barely looked up from his laptop computer. "He is simply going through a normal developmental phase," Robert said dismissively, continuing to type while she spoke. "Children are naturally dramatic at this age. He will adjust to the new circumstances without any lasting difficulties." "He misses you," Viola pressed, her voice carrying a desperation she tried to hide. "We both miss the man you used to be. When did you last have a real conversation with your son? When did you last truly look at the family you claim to be working so hard to provide for?" Robert finally glanced up from his screen, irritation flashing across his features like lightning. "I am working 18-hour days to build something extraordinary for this family. Everything I do, every sacrifice I make, is for you and Christopher. I would expect more support and understanding from my wife." The accusation hung in the air between them like toxic smoke. Viola had sacrificed her own career aspirations to manage their household and raise their son, while Robert pursued his increasingly consuming ambitions. To have her unwavering dedication questioned felt like the cruelest cut of all. "I've supported you through everything," she replied quietly, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "But I married a man who valued family above all else. I'm no longer certain who you are becoming." As winter approached their Lincoln Park home, Robert remained completely oblivious to the fact that something infinitely more valuable than business contracts was deteriorating, and by the time he finally noticed, it might already be too late to salvage what they had once cherished above all worldly possessions. Chapter 4. The Other Woman. Temptation rarely announces itself as evil. Instead, it arrives disguised as everything we believe we deserve, whispering promises that sound remarkably like our own suppressed desires. The prestigious law offices of Hartman and Associates occupied the 42nd floor of Chicago's Willis Tower, their floor-to-ceiling windows offering commanding views of the city's impressive architectural landscape. It was there, during a particularly intense negotiation session regarding a controversial downtown development project in October 2000, that 33-year-old Robert Redford first encountered 34-year-old Bette Michael and experienced a shift in his personal gravity that had nothing whatsoever to do with business. Bette entered the mahogany-paneled conference room like a perfectly orchestrated force of nature, her platinum blonde hair catching the afternoon sunlight, her crimson power suit tailored with precision that spoke of both confidence and considerable financial resources. She served as the lead interior designer for the opposing consortium's luxury hotel project, and from the moment she began presenting her vision, it became crystal clear that her intellect matched her striking physical appearance. "Gentlemen," she announced, spreading detailed architectural renderings across the polished conference table with practiced efficiency, "what we are proposing transcends the typical hotel concept. This represents a complete lifestyle statement, a bold declaration that Chicago deserves better than the generic, uninspired developments that have cluttered our skyline for far too long." Robert found himself leaning forward despite his determination to maintain professional objectivity, captivated not merely by her innovative proposals, but by the commanding way she controlled every aspect of the room's attention. Bette Michael was clearly a woman who had never required anyone's approval, never worried about school pickup schedules or family dinner preparations, never needed to balance her professional ambitions against someone else's emotional needs or domestic responsibilities. "Impressive work," Robert acknowledged when the formal presentation concluded, his usual business detachment mysteriously absent. "Though I remain convinced that our alternative vision offers superior long-term value for the community." Bette smiled with slow deliberation, a knowing expression that seemed to penetrate his professional facade with unsettling accuracy. "I have no doubt your proposal has considerable merit, Mr. Redford. Perhaps we could discuss the finer points over dinner. I find that the most productive negotiations often occur outside formal conference room settings." Arthur. The invitation lingered in the air between them, weighted with possibilities that Robert knew he should immediately decline. He thought of Viola at home, probably helping 3-year-old Christopher practice his letters, her patient voice guiding their son through the alphabet with endless encouragement. He pictured the dinner that would be waiting for him, imagined the way Viola's face would illuminate with joy when he walked through their front door. "I should mention that I am married," he said, though the words felt strange and defensive, in his mouth, as if he were offering an excuse rather than simply stating a fact. "I was not inquiring about your personal circumstances," Bette replied with smooth confidence. I suggested a business dinner to discuss our respective projects. Unless you believe your wife would object to professional networking. The subtle challenge in her voice was unmistakable, and Robert felt his ego respond to the implication that he required permission for routine business activities. Tomorrow evening, he heard himself saying before his rational mind could intervene. The Drake Hotel, 8 o'clock. That initial dinner was ostensibly focused on professional matters. They discussed design, philosophies, market trends, and potential collaboration opportunities between their respective firms. However, beneath the surface of their business conversation, something far more dangerous was developing. Bet represented everything that Viola was not, completely dedicated to her career, unencumbered by domestic responsibilities, and utterly fascinated by power, success, and the ambitious men who wielded both. "You are quite different from what I expected," she told him over an expertly prepared dessert. Her emerald eyes focused on his face with an intensity that made him feel like the most important person in the world. When I heard about the legendary Robert Redford, I anticipated meeting some conventional businessman. Instead, I find someone who is genuinely dynamic, truly visionary. I can understand why you have achieved such remarkable success. The praise affected him like a powerful drug after months of feeling unappreciated and taken for granted at home. When had Viola last spoken about his achievements with such obvious admiration? When had she last regarded him as extraordinary, rather than simply expecting perfection as a matter of course? My wife does not really comprehend the complexities of the business world, Robert found himself confessing, immediately feeling guilty for the betrayal implicit in those words. Her interests center more around domestic concerns and child-rearing responsibilities. How tremendously limiting that must be for someone with your vision and ambition, Bet responded, her manicured hand briefly touching his across the linen tablecloth. A man of your caliber requires a partner who truly appreciates greatness, someone who understands that extraordinary achievement demands extraordinary sacrifice. Robert arrived home that evening to discover Viola asleep on their living room sofa, a book lying open across her chest, and Christopher's toys scattered around her feet. She had obviously waited up for him as long as possible, finally succumbing to exhaustion only after hours of hoping he would return in time for meaningful conversation. He stood in the doorway observing her peaceful expression, experiencing a complex mixture of guilt and growing resentment. Viola remained beautiful, perhaps more beautiful now than when they had first met, but her beauty had become inextricably linked with responsibilities, expectations, and a life that suddenly felt constrictive compared to the expansive possibilities that Bet represented. The second dinner led naturally to a third, then regular business drinks, then lengthy phone conversations that Robert rationalized as professional consultations. Bet made him feel like a conquering hero rather than a husband who was failing to balance career demands with family obligations. She celebrated his successes without mentioning their costs, encouraged his ambitions without questioning their consequences on others. "You were born for greatness," she would tell him during their increasingly frequent late-night phone calls, her voice like warm honey flowing over his bruised ego. "Do not allow anyone to make you feel guilty for pursuing your true destiny." Their first kiss occurred in November 2000 in the back seat of a taxi, following a successful presentation to a consortium of international investors. Robert had just secured the largest deal of his career, a mixed-use development that would fundamentally reshape an entire neighborhood, and Bet was the only person who seemed to truly comprehend the magnitude of his achievement. "You were absolutely magnificent in that room," she whispered, her face close to his in the taxi's dim lighting. "Completely magnificent." When their lips met, Robert experienced a thrill he had not felt in years, the dangerous excitement of forbidden territory, the intoxicating rush of being truly seen and appreciated. For those few moments, he forgot everything else. His wedding, vows, his sleeping son, his wife who trusted him completely. The affair that developed was conducted with the same meticulous planning that Robert applied to his most important business deals. Secret lunch meetings evolved into afternoon rendezvous. Business trips included mysterious delays and unexplained extensions. Bet's downtown penthouse apartment became a sanctuary where Robert could be the man he believed he was destined to become, powerful, desired, and liberated from the constraints of domestic responsibility. "With you, I feel capable of conquering the entire world," he told Bet one afternoon in December 2000, as they lay together in her king-sized bed, the city skyline visible through her floor-to-ceiling windows. "You can conquer anything you choose," she replied, tracing intricate patterns on his chest with her perfectly manicured fingernails. "You simply need to stop allowing other people to limit your potential." The guilt was constant but manageable, rationalized away through an increasingly sophisticated system of self-deception. He was still a good father when he was home, still provided generously for his family, still loved them in his own way. This relationship with Bet was separate, compartmentalized, having nothing to do with his responsibilities as a husband and father. But compartments have a tendency to bleed into each other, and by Christmas of 2000, the strain was beginning to show in ways that even Robert could not ignore. He was distracted during family celebrations, irritable when interrupted by domestic concerns, and increasingly critical of Viola's failure to understand the pressures he faced in his professional life. "You do not know what it is like," he snapped at her when she suggested he was working too much. "You do not understand the weight of responsibility I carry every single day." As 2000 drew to a close, Robert convinced himself that he could maintain this delicate balance indefinitely, never imagining that the most dangerous deceptions are those we practice on ourselves, and that every secret carved another irreparable crack in the foundation of everything he claimed to value most. Chapter 5. Grandmother's Illness. In the shadow of death, we discover the true measure of our character. But sometimes that revelation arrives when it is already too late to change the story we have written. The phone call shattered the silence. At 2:30, on a bitter February morning in 2003, Viola jolted awake to the piercing ring, her maternal instincts immediately alert to potential danger. Beside her, Robert stirred but remained unconscious, his exhaustion from another alleged late business meeting, though Viola was beginning to suspect the true nature of these increasingly frequent absences, keeping him oblivious to the emergency unfolding around them. "Viola, sweetheart, you need to come immediately." Her mother's voice was thin and frightened on the other end of the line. "It's Grandma Rose. She collapsed during dinner tonight. The paramedics are transporting her to Northwestern Memorial Hospital." Viola's grandmother, Rose Davis, was the undisputed matriarch of their entire family, a remarkable woman of 89 who had survived the Great Depression, buried 2 beloved husbands, and raised 5 children with an iron will wrapped in velvet compassion. To everyone who knew her, she seemed virtually indestructible, a constant source of wisdom and strength who had never spent a single day in any hospital. "I have to leave immediately," Viola whispered to Robert, shaking him gently awake. "Grandma Rose is in the emergency room." Robert sat up quickly, immediately alert in the way that successful businessmen learn to be when crisis demands their attention. "How serious is her condition?" he asked, already reaching for his phone to check messages that apparently could not wait even for family emergencies. "I do not know yet. I need to wake Christopher and get to the hospital as quickly as possible." "Leave him here with me," Robert said, scrolling through emails with practiced efficiency. "I have an early presentation tomorrow morning, but Mrs. Patterson can watch him until you return." Mrs. Patterson was their trusted housekeeper, a kind woman who had become almost family to 4-year-old Christopher. Viola paused in the act of gathering her clothes, struck by Robert's immediate assumption that he would not be accompanying her during this family crisis. "This is my grandmother, Robert. She raised me. She might be dying. And I will visit the hospital as soon as my schedule permits," he assured her, though his attention was already drifting back to his phone's glowing screen. "The Henderson project is at an absolutely critical juncture. If I miss tomorrow's presentation, we could lose everything we have worked toward." There had been a time when Robert would have cancelled any meeting to be with Viola during a family emergency. Now, he seemed to view her crises as inconvenient interruptions to his business schedule and his secret life with Bet Michael. The next 3 weeks became a nightmare of hospital corridors, difficult medical decisions, and sleepless vigils. Grandma Rose had suffered a massive stroke, and while she initially survived the immediate crisis, the doctors made it clear that her condition was grave and her prognosis uncertain. Sometimes she was lucid, recognizing family members and speaking clearly about her concerns for their futures. Other times, she drifted in a confused haze, calling out for people who had been dead for decades. Viola practically lived at the hospital, dividing her time between her grandmother's bedside and managing Christopher's disrupted routine. 4-year-old Christopher was confused and frightened by the sudden change in his world. His mother constantly absent, his father more distant than ever, and the mysterious illness that had taken away his beloved great-grandmother, who had always made the best cookies and told the most wonderful stories. "Where Mama go every day?" Christopher would ask Mrs. Patterson every morning, his blue eyes wide with worry and confusion. "She is taking care of Great-Grandma Rose," Mrs. Patterson would explain patiently. "Great-Grandma is very sick, and she needs Mama to help her feel better." But Viola's absences stretched longer each day as Grandma Rose's condition deteriorated progressively. The family took turns at her bedside, sharing memories and offering comfort during what they all knew were likely her final days. Through it all, Robert's presence was sporadic and reluctant, his excuses becoming more elaborate with each missed visit. "I stopped by yesterday afternoon," he would tell Viola when she called to update him on her grandmother's condition. "She was sleeping, so I did not stay long. Besides, the entire family was there. You do not really need me taking up space." His casual dismissal of their family's pain cut deeper than any business rejection ever could. What Viola did not know was that Robert was using her grandmother's illness as convenient cover for extended meetings with Bet, claiming family obligations when he was actually pursuing his affair with renewed intensity and decreasing caution. "I understand you are going through a tremendously difficult time," Bet would purr sympathetically when Robert arrived at her apartment, stress and guilt written across his face. "Let me help you forget your troubles for a few hours." The breaking point came during Grandma Rose's final week. Viola had been at the hospital for 16 straight hours, holding her grandmother's hand and watching the monitors that showed a life slowly ebbing away. Christopher was staying with Viola's mother, confused and acting out because his routine had been completely disrupted and his primary source of security seemed to have disappeared. "I need you here," Viola told Robert over the phone, her voice finally cracking after weeks of stoic strength. "Christopher needs his father, and I need my husband. My grandmother is dying, Robert. She raised me. She is the strongest woman I have ever known, and she is leaving us." "I understand how tremendously difficult this situation must be," Robert replied, but Viola could hear the distraction in his voice, the barely contained impatience of a man who wanted to end an inconvenient conversation. In the background, she thought she heard soft music and the clink of wine glasses. But there is nothing I can do to change the medical situation. You are handling everything beautifully. You are much stronger than you realize. I should not have to handle this alone, Viola said, her composure finally breaking after weeks of maintaining strength for everyone around her. We are supposed to be partners. We are supposed to face life's greatest challenges together. And we will, Robert assured her, though his voice carried the hollow ring of empty promises. As soon as this business crisis passes, everything will return to normal. You will see. But Viola was beginning to understand that this was their new normal. Robert's business would always be in crisis, always require his immediate attention, always take precedence over family obligations and emotional needs. Grandma Rose died on a Tuesday morning in March 2003, with Viola holding one hand and her mother holding the other. The woman who had been the cornerstone of their family slipped away peacefully, her last words a whispered blessing for her granddaughter's happiness and a prayer for Christopher's bright future. "Take care of that beautiful boy," Grandma Rose had whispered to Viola in one of her final lucid moments. "He is going to accomplish great things, but he will need his mother's strength and wisdom to guide him through the challenges ahead." Robert arrived at the hospital 40 minutes after Grandma Rose's death, still wearing his business suit and carrying his briefcase because he had come directly from what he claimed was an urgent meeting. He found Viola in the family waiting room, surrounded by relatives who were sharing memories and planning funeral arrangements. "I am deeply sorry," he said, the words formal and distant. "I know how much she meant to you and your entire family." Viola looked up at her husband, this man she had loved completely, who had once promised to be her partner in all of life's joys and sorrows, and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. He was offering condolences like a business associate, maintaining the careful emotional distance that seemed to characterize all their interactions now. "She asked for you," Viola said quietly, "yesterday when she was still lucid. She wanted to say goodbye to her grandson-in-law and give you her blessing. I told her you would come." Robert's face flushed slightly, but his response was defensive, rather than apologetic. "I was tied up with the Morrison acquisition. If I had known the situation was that urgent, I would have rearranged my schedule." "She was 91 years old and dying," Viola interrupted, her voice carrying a coldness that Robert had never heard before. How much more urgent could the situation possibly be? As they prepared to lay Grandma Rose to rest, none of them could have predicted that the funeral would become not just an ending, but a revelation that would shatter what remained of their family's fragile foundation forever. Chapter 6. The Funeral Betrayal. There are betrayals that cut like knives, and then there are betrayals that shatter souls. This was the latter, witnessed by heaven and earth alike. The morning of Grandma Rose's funeral dawned grey and bitter, with March winds whipping off Lake Michigan and cutting through even the heaviest coats. 34-year-old Viola stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the black dress she had worn to only one other funeral in her life, trying to prepare herself emotionally for saying goodbye to the woman who had been her anchor through every storm. 6-year-old Christopher sat on the edge of their bed wearing his first suit, a tiny black ensemble that made him look heartbreakingly grown up. He did not fully understand death, but he sensed the gravity of the day from his mother's red-rimmed eyes and the way adults spoke in hushed, careful tones throughout their house. "Is Daddy coming with us?" Christopher asked, his small voice carrying a hope that stabbed at Viola's heart like a physical wound. "Of course he is, sweetheart," Viola replied, though Robert had already left for the office that morning, promising to meet them at the church. Daddy will be there to say goodbye to Great-Grandma Rose. Robert had spent the previous evening in his study, taking phone calls and reviewing contracts, while Viola finalized funeral arrangements and tried to comfort grieving relatives who had traveled from across the country. Even in death, it seemed, Grandma Rose could not command Robert's complete attention, though what Viola did not know was that many of those business calls were actually conversations with Bet Michael, who had become increasingly demanding of his time and emotional energy. The funeral service was held at St. Augustine's Catholic Church, where Grandma Rose had worshipped faithfully for over 60 years. The Gothic architecture and stained glass windows provided a solemn backdrop as 4 generations of the Davis family gathered to honor their beloved matriarch. Viola's mother had done a beautiful job with the arrangements, white lilies everywhere, framed photographs showcasing Grandma Rose's long and meaningful life, and a guest book that quickly filled with signatures from the hundreds of lives she had touched. Viola sat in the front pew with Christopher on her lap, scanning the crowd for Robert's familiar face. The service was scheduled to begin at 10 o'clock, and by 5 minutes past the hour, her husband still had not arrived. Christopher kept turning around, looking for his father among the sea of mourners who had come to pay their respects. "Where?" "Daddy," he whispered, loud enough for nearby relatives to hear the disappointment in his young voice. "He will be here soon," Viola murmured, though anxiety was beginning to replace disappointment. Robert might be distant lately, but he would not miss something this important. Something must have happened, a business emergency, a traffic accident, something that would explain his absence and make his tardiness forgivable. At 10:15, just as the priest was preparing to begin the service without further delay, the heavy church doors opened with a creak that echoed through the sanctuary like a gunshot. Viola turned with relief, expecting to see Robert hurrying down the aisle with apologetic gestures and whispered explanations for his lateness. Instead, she saw something that would haunt her for the rest of her life and change the trajectory of her family's future forever. 34-year-old Robert entered the church wearing his best black suit, looking every inch the successful businessman, even in this moment of supposed family grief. But he was not alone. Beside him, her arm linked through his with casual intimacy that screamed of familiarity, walked a stunning blonde woman in an elegant black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. She was beautiful in the way that money could buy. Perfectly styled platinum hair, flawless makeup, and an air of sophistication that came from never having to worry about anything more serious than which designer handbag matched her outfit. The church fell silent, except for the whispered gasps of family members who recognized the profound violation taking place before their eyes. Viola felt the blood drain from her face as she watched her husband escort this stranger down the center aisle of her grandmother's funeral, as if this were some sort of social event rather than a sacred moment of grief and remembrance. Christopher sensed the change in atmosphere immediately, his 6-year-old intuition picking up on the adult's shock and dismay. "Daddy," he called out excitedly, starting to wave until Viola gently caught his hand, her heart breaking at her son's innocent joy in seeing his father. Robert's eyes met Viola's across the church, and she saw something in his expression that chilled her to the bone, not shame or regret, but a cold defiance, as if he were daring her to make a scene at her own grandmother's funeral. The message was clear. He had moved beyond caring about her feelings or the family's reputation. The blonde woman, Bet Michael, though Viola did not yet know her name, surveyed the church with the detached interest of someone attending a performance. She whispered something to Robert that made him nod curtly, and they took seats in the back pew, as if their late arrival with an unauthorized guest were perfectly normal behavior for a family funeral. Viola turned back to face the altar, her entire body trembling with a combination of grief, rage, and humiliation that threatened to overwhelm her completely. Around her, she could feel the sympathetic stares of family members who were witnessing her husband's public betrayal in real time. Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand, offering silent support in a moment when words would have been both inadequate and dangerous. The service proceeded in a haze of unreality. The priest spoke beautifully about Grandma Rose's life of service and faith, her dedication to family and community. Viola's uncle delivered a touching eulogy about the woman who had held their family together through decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and tragedy. But through it all, Viola was acutely aware of Robert's presence behind her, the husband who had chosen to bring his mistress to her grandmother's funeral. Christopher began to fidget during the service, confused by his mother's obvious distress and his father's strange behavior. When the congregation stood to sing Grandma Rose's favorite hymn, Amazing Grace, Christopher tugged on Viola's dress with the persistence of a confused child. "Mama sad," he whispered, his blue eyes wide with concern and confusion. "A little. A bit, baby," Viola managed to say, her voice thick with unshed tears. "But Mama is okay. Great-Grandma Rose is in heaven now, and she is not sick anymore." "Daddy make Mama feel better?" Christopher asked hopefully, his innocent faith in his father's ability to fix everything breaking Viola's heart into smaller pieces. The innocent question hit Viola like a physical blow. How could she explain to her 6-year-old son that Daddy was the reason Mama felt broken? How could she tell him that the man they both loved and trusted had just committed an act of betrayal so profound that it had changed everything about their lives? "Mama is going to be fine," she whispered, pulling Christopher closer to her side. "We are going to be fine." As the service concluded and the congregation prepared to move to the cemetery for the burial, Robert finally approached the front of the church. He walked alone. Apparently even he recognized that bringing his mistress to the graveside would be crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. "Viola," he said quietly, his voice carrying none of the warmth or affection that had once characterized their every interaction. "I apologize for being late. A business emergency ran longer than expected." Viola looked up at her husband, this man who had once promised to love and cherish her, who had held her hand through every difficulty, who had sworn before God and their families to be faithful until death parted them, and felt something inside her chest die permanently. "Who is she?" Viola asked, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of 6 years of marriage and absolute trust. Robert's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might actually lie to her face in this sacred place. "Her name is Bette Michael. She is a business associate who has been helping with the Henderson project." "Business associates do not attend family funerals, Robert." "She offered to drive me when she heard about the family emergency," Robert said, his explanation sounding rehearsed and hollow. "I thought it would be rude to refuse her kind gesture." The lie was so transparent, so insulting to her intelligence, that Viola almost laughed despite her heartbreak. Here, in the church where they had celebrated Christopher's baptism, where they had attended Christmas services as a happy family, Robert was lying to her with the casual ease of someone who no longer respected her enough to tell the truth. "Daddy!" Christopher called out, reaching for his father with the unconditional love that only children possess. Robert scooped up his son, and for a moment his mask slipped completely. Viola saw genuine love and confusion in his eyes, as if he could not understand why his family could not simply accommodate his new arrangements the way his business associates had learned to do. "Hey there, buddy," Robert said, his voice softening, as it always did when he spoke to Christopher. "Are you being good for Mama?" "I am being very good," Christopher assured him solemnly. "Great-Grandma Rose went to heaven, and now she is not sick anymore." "That is exactly right," Robert agreed, though his attention was already drifting toward the church doors where Bet waited beside her expensive car. At the cemetery, as they lowered Grandma Rose's casket into the frozen ground, Viola stood with Christopher's small hand in hers and made a silent promise to the woman who had taught her about strength, dignity, and the importance of standing up for what was right. "Do not worry, Grandma," she whispered to the wind that carried her words across the memorial gardens. "I will not let him destroy what you taught me about self-respect and standing up for our family." Beside her, Christopher squeezed her hand tighter and said the words that would echo in Viola's heart for the next 18 years. "Do not worry, Mama. I am with you." As dirt fell onto Grandma Rose's casket and Robert drove away with his mistress, neither he nor Viola could have imagined that their 6-year-old son had just made a promise that would shape the next 18 years of their lives, and ultimately reshape Robert's entire empire in ways no business plan could have predicted. As the funeral cortege departed and the cemetery returned to silence, Christopher's promise hung in the cold March air like a sacred oath, one that would grow stronger with each passing year until it became the foundation for the most complete revenge any abandoned son had ever orchestrated. Chapter 7. The Son's Greatness Emerges. From the ashes of betrayal, the strongest souls rise with a fire that can light the world or burn it down, and sometimes both destinies walk hand in hand. The modest 2-bedroom apartment on Chicago's South Side bore no resemblance to the comfortable Lincoln Park house where Christopher had spent the first 6 years of his life. The walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing at all hours. The heating system was unreliable during Chicago's brutal winters, and the kitchen was so small that only one person could prepare meals at a time. But within those humble walls, something extraordinary was taking shape, the forging of an unbreakable bond between mother and son, and the emergence of a child whose intelligence and determination would one day shake the very foundations of his father's empire. It was April 2003, when 34-year-old Viola took the apartment with whatever savings she could access before Robert's aggressive lawyers froze their joint accounts. The divorce proceedings were brutal and prolonged, with 36-year-old Robert fighting every dollar of support despite his millions. As if punishing Viola for refusing to tolerate his infidelity and public humiliation, he provided only the bare minimum required by Illinois law, enough to keep them from absolute poverty, but nowhere near enough to maintain the lifestyle 6-year-old Christopher had known for his entire life. "This is our new home," Viola told Christopher on their first night, spreading blankets on the living room floor to make their situation feel like an adventure rather than a devastating tragedy. "It is smaller than our old house, but it belongs to us, and we will make it beautiful together." Christopher, now 6 years old and possessing emotional intelligence that seemed far beyond his chronological age, could sense his mother's carefully hidden despair. He could see through her brave smiles to the exhaustion and heartbreak underneath, the weight of single parenthood pressing down on her shoulders like an invisible burden. Rather than adding to her struggles with tantrums or complaints about their reduced circumstances, he seemed determined to become her partner in rebuilding their shattered lives. "I like it here, Mama," he said seriously, patting her hand with the solemnity of a much older child. "It feels cozy and safe, and I can hear you better when you need me." The observation hit Viola like a physical blow, the realization that her young son had become so attuned to her emotional state that he was actively monitoring her moods and trying to provide comfort. She pulled him into her arms, holding him close while struggling not to let him see the tears that threatened to overwhelm her composure. "Mama is not sad when she is with you," she whispered into his hair, breathing in the familiar scent that had comforted her since his birth. "You make everything better, Christopher. You always have." And slowly, incredibly, it began to be true. Christopher threw himself into their new life with an enthusiasm and maturity that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. When Viola took a job as a substitute teacher to supplement Robert's inadequate support payments, Christopher would wake up early to help pack their lunches, carefully making peanut butter sandwiches with the concentrated focus of someone much older. "I made yours with extra jelly," he would announce proudly each morning, "because you like sweet things when you are working hard and feeling tired." His academic abilities, which had always been impressive for his age, seemed to accelerate dramatically under the pressure of their new circumstances. By the time he entered first grade at the local public school in September 2003, Christopher was already reading chapter books independently and solving math problems that challenged children 2 or 3 years older. His teachers were amazed by his intellectual capacity, but more importantly, they were struck by his emotional maturity and his obvious concern for his mother's welfare. Mrs. Redford, his first-grade teacher Ms. Rodriguez, called Viola in for a conference just 6 weeks into the school year. "I need to discuss Christopher's academic placement and some concerns about his emotional development." Viola arrived at the school directly from her morning job at Roosevelt Elementary, still wearing the simple dress and cardigan that had replaced her former wardrobe of designer clothes. She found Christopher in the classroom during recess, helping younger students with their reading instead of playing with children his own age, a pattern that was becoming increasingly common. "Christopher is academically gifted beyond anything I have encountered in 15 years of teaching," Ms. Rodriguez explained carefully. "He has already mastered our entire first-grade curriculum and most of what we teach in second and third grade. But I am concerned that he is taking on adult responsibilities that no 6-year-old should carry." Viola watched her son patiently help a struggling classmate sound out difficult words, his small face serious with concentration and genuine care. "He has always been bright and considerate," she said, pride mixing with worry in her voice, "but I cannot afford private school or special programs for gifted children." "That may not be necessary," Ms. Rodriguez replied thoughtfully. "What Christopher needs most is stability, challenge, and the chance to be a child sometimes. He seems to feel responsible for taking care of you, which is a heavy burden for someone so young." The teacher was absolutely correct. At home, Christopher had appointed himself as Viola's assistant and protector in ways that went far beyond normal childhood helpfulness. He would notice when she was particularly tired and would quietly take over tasks like sorting laundry or organizing their small kitchen. When bill collectors called, which happened with distressing frequency, he would politely tell them that his mother was unavailable and take detailed messages with a composure that unnerved adults. "Mama," he said one evening in November 2003, when he was still 6, finding Viola crying over a stack of past due notices that had accumulated despite her best efforts. "I have been thinking about our money problems, and I believe I have some solutions." Viola quickly wiped her eyes, not wanting her son to worry about adult financial concerns that were her responsibility to handle. "Sweetheart, you do not need to think about money. That is Mama's job to figure out. But I have ideas that could help," Christopher insisted, climbing onto her lap with the confidence of someone much older and more experienced. Mrs. Patterson from our old house pays people to walk her dog because she is too busy with work, and Mr. Chen in apartment 3B needs help carrying groceries because his back hurts from his construction job. I could start a helping business to earn money for our family. The suggestion was so practical and thoughtfully considered that Viola found herself taking it seriously despite her son's age. "You want to start a business? Christopher, you are only 6 years old." "Age is just a number, Mama," Christopher replied with the matter-of-fact tone that had become his trademark. "You taught me that people pay money for things that make their lives easier and better. I can make people's lives easier." Within 2 months, Christopher had established himself as the unofficial neighborhood helper, taking on age-appropriate tasks that allowed him to contribute to their household income. He walked dogs for busy professionals, carried groceries for elderly residents, and organized playgroups for working parents who needed reliable childcare. His clients paid him in small bills and coins, which he carefully counted and saved in a coffee can labeled "family money" in his neat 6-year-old handwriting. "I made $12 this week," he would report to Viola with obvious pride every Sunday evening. "Mrs. Johnson gave me an extra $2 because I helped her organize her medicine cabinet by days of the week. And Mr. Martinez paid me $3 for reading to his grandson while he took a nap." Viola watched her son's enterprise with a mixture of amazement and heartbreak. Christopher was learning lessons about business, responsibility, and self-reliance that most children his age could not even comprehend. But he was also losing the carefree innocence that childhood was supposed to provide, forced into premature adulthood by circumstances beyond anyone's control. The transformation became even more apparent during their infrequent encounters with Robert. The court-mandated visitations were sporadic at best. Robert's business schedule and his relationship with Bette Michael made regular parenting time inconvenient. When he did show up, usually in an expensive car with his phone constantly ringing, Christopher would observe his father with the analytical gaze of someone studying a fascinating but ultimately disappointing specimen. "Why does not Daddy live with us anymore?" Christopher asked after one particularly tense visit in the spring of 2004, when Robert had spent more time taking phone calls than actually talking to his son. Viola chose her words carefully, determined not to poison Christopher's relationship with his father, despite Robert's increasingly obvious lack of interest in parenthood. Sometimes adults make choices that change how families work, but that does not mean Daddy does not love you. "Does he love the pretty lady more than he loves us?" Christopher asked with devastating directness that cut straight to the heart of their situation. The question hung in the air, like smoke from a fire that could not be extinguished. Christopher was now 7 years old, mature enough to understand more than Viola wanted him to know, but still too young to process the full complexity of adult betrayal and selfishness. "Adults sometimes make mistakes that hurt the people they love," Viola said finally, choosing honesty over comfortable lies. "But you and I are going to be just fine. We are a team. Remember, the best team in the world." "The strongest team," Christopher agreed, hugging her tightly with arms that seemed to grow more protective each day. "And someday, Mama, I'm going to make sure you never have to worry about money again. I'm going to be so successful that we can buy back our old house and show Daddy what he lost when he chose that lady over us." The promise was delivered with such quiet intensity and unwavering determination that Viola felt a chill run down her spine. Her 7-year-old son was already planning for a future that seemed decades away, but he spoke with the certainty of someone who had mapped out every step of a very long journey. As Christopher approached his 8th birthday, neither he nor Viola could have imagined that this extraordinary combination of intelligence, determination, and carefully controlled anger would one day become the foundation for the most spectacular business empire Chicago had ever seen, and the instrument of the most complete revenge any abandoned son had ever orchestrated. Chapter 8. The Education Years. True education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. And Christopher's fire would burn bright enough to illuminate his path to greatness and cast long shadows over his enemies. By the time Christopher turned 8 in February 2005, his reputation as an exceptional student had spread throughout Chicago's public school system. Despite the financial constraints that prevented private school enrollment, Christopher's obvious intellectual gifts had attracted the attention of Dr. Patricia Williams, the district's coordinator for gifted education, who arranged for him to participate in advanced academic programs at no cost to his family. Mrs. Redford, Dr. Williams explained during a meeting in her downtown office, Christopher possesses what we call exceptional intellectual capacity, combined with unusual emotional maturity. His standardized test scores place him in the top 1% of students nationally, but more importantly, he demonstrates leadership qualities and problem-solving abilities that suggest extraordinary potential. Viola sat across from the educator, wearing her best professional outfit and trying not to reveal how much this meeting meant to their family's future. What exactly are you recommending for Christopher's education? We would like to enroll him in our accelerated learning program, which allows gifted students to work at their own pace while maintaining social connections with age-appropriate peers. Christopher would attend regular classes for subjects like art, music, and physical education, but receive individualized instruction in mathematics, science, and language arts. The program proved to be exactly what Christopher needed. By age 9, he was studying algebra and geometry, while his classmates struggled with basic multiplication tables. His reading comprehension tested at high school level, and his writing demonstrated sophisticated analytical thinking that impressed even university professors who reviewed his work anonymously. Your son, his fourth-grade teacher confided to Viola during a parent conference in 2006, asks questions that force me to research topics I have not considered since graduate school. Yesterday, he wanted to understand the economic factors that contributed to the Great Depression. Today, he is analyzing the literary techniques used in novels I did not read until college. But Christopher's academic excellence was only part of his remarkable development. His after-school business ventures had evolved into sophisticated operations that generated steady income for their household. By age 10 in 2007, he was managing a network of neighborhood services that included dog walking, grocery delivery, tutoring younger students, and organizing community events. I earned $43 this week. He would report to Viola every Sunday evening, presenting detailed financial records that tracked income, expenses, and savings with the precision of a trained accountant. I have set aside 60% for our household expenses, invested 30% in expanding the business, and saved 10% for college tuition. Viola often felt like she was living with a miniature executive rather than a child. Christopher would review their monthly budget with her, suggesting cost-saving measures and identifying opportunities for additional income. He negotiated better rates on their utilities, researched more affordable insurance policies, and somehow managed to triple their savings through careful financial planning. The transition to middle school in 2008 brought new challenges and opportunities. Christopher, now 11 years old, was academically prepared for high school coursework, but emotionally and socially still needed the structure of age-appropriate education. His teachers developed a customized curriculum that allowed him to study advanced subjects while participating in regular school activities. Christopher could easily skip several grade levels, his middle school principal explained to Viola during a planning meeting. But research shows that academically gifted children benefit from staying with their age peers for social development. We want to challenge his mind without isolating him from normal childhood experiences. The approach worked brilliantly. Christopher excelled in advanced mathematics and science courses offered through a partnership with nearby Northwestern University, while also participating in school sports, drama productions, and student government. His classmates elected him student council president 3 years running, drawn to his natural leadership abilities and genuine concern for others' welfare. "Your boy has something special," his basketball coach told Viola after watching Christopher organize team fundraisers and volunteer coaching sessions for younger players. "He makes everyone around him better, not just at basketball, but as people. I have never seen anything like it." High school brought even greater academic opportunities and challenges. Christopher entered Lincoln Park High School in 2011 as a 14-year-old freshman who tested at university level in multiple subjects. Rather than rushing through graduation, he chose to use the extra time to explore diverse interests and build real-world experience. "I want to understand every aspect of business and economics," he told Viola when she asked about his educational goals. "I need to know how successful companies are built, how financial markets operate, and how to create value for communities while generating profits. This knowledge will be essential for achieving my long-term objectives." Those objectives remained consistent throughout his teenage years: build enough wealth and influence to provide security for his mother and demonstrate to his father the magnitude of potential that had been abandoned. Christopher never spoke about revenge in crude terms, but his determination to surpass Robert's achievements was evident in every decision he made. His business ventures during high school became increasingly sophisticated and profitable. Christopher launched a tutoring service that employed older students and recent graduates, created an online platform that connected neighborhood service providers with customers, and invested his earnings in carefully researched stock portfolios that consistently outperformed market averages. "How does a 15-year-old know which stocks to buy?" asked Mr. David Chen, a neighbor who had watched Christopher's investment success with amazement. "I read everything," Christopher replied matter-of-factly. "Annual reports, industry analyses, economic forecasts, management profiles. I study companies the same way other kids study for tests, except the grades are measured in dollars rather than letters." His academic performance remained exemplary throughout high school. Christopher graduated as valedictorian in June 2015 at age 18, having already completed several college-level courses and accumulated enough credits for early university admission. Multiple prestigious universities offered full scholarships, recognizing both his intellectual abilities and his demonstrated leadership potential. "I have been accepted to Harvard, Stanford, Northwestern, and the University of Chicago," Christopher told Viola as they reviewed his options together. "All 4 schools have offered complete financial packages that would cover tuition, housing, and living expenses." Viola looked at her 18-year-old son. This remarkable young man who had somehow maintained his warmth and integrity despite carrying adult responsibilities since childhood, and felt an overwhelming mixture of pride and gratitude. "Which school do you want to attend?" "Northwestern," Christopher replied without hesitation. "I want to stay close to you, and their business school has the best connections to Chicago's financial community. Local relationships will be crucial for building the kind of enterprise I envision." As they sat together in their small apartment, Christopher outlined his plans for the next phase of his education with the strategic thinking of a seasoned executive. He would complete his undergraduate business degree in 3 years, while building professional relationships and gaining practical experience through internships and consulting projects. "And then?" Viola asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Christopher's blue eyes, so much like his father's, yet filled with a purpose and integrity his father had never possessed, met hers with unwavering determination. "Then I start building my empire, one that will make Daddy's accomplishments look insignificant by comparison." As Christopher prepared to enter Northwestern University at 18, neither he nor Viola could have imagined that within 7 short years his name would be spoken alongside the most powerful business leaders in America, and that his father's empire would tremble at the sound of it. Chapter 9. Rise to Power, the Most Powerful Businessman. They say that living well is the best revenge, but Christopher would discover that living extraordinarily was even better and far more devastating to those who had underestimated his potential. Christopher entered Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management in September 2015 as an 18-year-old freshman with the focused intensity of someone who understood exactly where he was going and why each step mattered. While his classmates were adjusting to college life and exploring their interests, Christopher was systematically building the foundation for what would become one of the most impressive business empires in Chicago's history. His academic performance was exceptional from the very beginning. Christopher completed his undergraduate degree in business administration in just 2.5 years, graduating summa cum laude in December 2017 at age 20. But more importantly than his grades were the relationships he cultivated and the real-world experience he accumulated while still a student. "Your son is remarkable," Professor Margaret Walsh, his strategic management instructor, told Viola during Christopher's graduation ceremony. "I have taught MBA students with decades of experience who do not possess his intuitive understanding of market dynamics and organizational behavior. He thinks like a CEO while still in his teens." Christopher had used his university years to build an extensive network of contacts throughout Chicago's business community. He interned at major corporations during summers, shadowed successful entrepreneurs during winter breaks, and attended every professional conference and networking event that would accept student participants. His business ventures, which had begun as neighborhood services, evolved into sophisticated enterprises that generated substantial revenue. "I have been offered positions at Goldman Sachs, McKinsey & Company, and Bain Capital," Christopher told Viola as they celebrated his graduation with dinner at their favorite restaurant. The starting salaries range from $120,000 to $150,000 annually. Viola looked at her 20-year-old son, marveling at how far they had traveled from that small South Side apartment where they had started over 14 years earlier. "Those are incredible opportunities, Christopher. Which offer will you accept?" "None of them," Christopher replied with a smile that reminded her of the determined 6-year-old who had promised to take care of her. "I am going to start my own company instead. I have identified market opportunities that established firms cannot pursue because of their size and bureaucracy. I can move faster and take risks that they cannot afford." In January 2018, at age 20, Christopher founded Davis Development Corporation with $50,000 in savings from his various business ventures and a small business loan that he had somehow convinced 3 different banks to approve, despite his age. The company was named in honor of his mother's maiden name and his great-grandmother Rose, whose funeral had changed the trajectory of their entire family. "Why Davis instead of Redford?" Viola asked as she watched her 20-year-old son sign incorporation papers with the focused intensity of a seasoned executive. Because Redford represents the past, Christopher replied without looking up from the documents. Davis represents the future. Besides, I want to honor the women who raised me with integrity and strength, not the man who abandoned us for his selfish desires. Christopher's first major project was ambitious beyond what most people thought possible for someone his age: the renovation and redevelopment of a struggling apartment complex in the same South Side neighborhood where he and Viola had lived after the divorce. Where other developers saw only problems and liability, Christopher saw opportunity and potential for positive community impact. "This kid is either a genius or completely insane," muttered James Morrison, a veteran real estate developer who initially dismissed Christopher as a novelty act. No one has ever made that neighborhood profitable without compromising safety or affordability. But Christopher was not operating like traditional developers. He hired locally whenever possible, creating jobs for neighborhood residents and investing in job training programs. He partnered with community organizations to provide financial literacy education and after-school programs for children. He installed solar panels and energy-efficient systems that reduced operating costs while helping the environment. Most importantly, he treated tenants like valued customers rather than inconveniences to be managed. The project was completed 6 months ahead of schedule and 15% under budget. More impressive than the financial success was the transformation of the entire neighborhood. Crime rates dropped significantly, property values increased throughout the area, and local businesses began to thrive as residents felt safer and more optimistic about their community's future. "Your son," Mayor Rahm Emanuel told Viola during a ceremony honoring Christopher's contribution to urban renewal, "is demonstrating that ethical business practices and community development can be more profitable than traditional approaches. He is rewriting the rules for how development should be done in Chicago." The success of his first project attracted attention from investors across the Midwest. By his 21st birthday in February 2019, Christopher had completed 5 more development projects, each more ambitious and successful than the last. His company's revenue had grown from $0 to $8 million in just over 1 year, and he was being courted by major firms who wanted to partner with the young entrepreneur. "I am not interested in traditional partnerships," Christopher told potential investors with polite but firm conviction. "I'm building something specific, and I need complete control to achieve my vision while maintaining our ethical standards." That vision became clearer as Christopher's empire expanded rapidly. While other developers focused solely on profit margins, Christopher built a company culture that emphasized innovation, community development, and long-term sustainability. His employees, many of whom were older than his mother, spoke about him with a mixture of awe and genuine affection. "He is unlike any boss I have ever worked for," explained Maria Santos, a project manager who had joined Davis Development from a Fortune 500 corporation. "He knows every employee's name, remembers details about their families, and treats everyone with respect and dignity. But when it comes to business strategy and negotiation, he is absolutely ruthless in pursuing excellence." Christopher's negotiation skills had become legendary throughout Chicago's business community. At 21, he could walk into a room full of experienced executives and emerge with deals that left his opponents wondering what had happened. He combined natural charisma with a level of preparation and strategic thinking that seemed almost supernatural. "He studies everything about every situation," revealed David Chen, a contractor who had worked with Christopher on multiple projects. Before any negotiation, he knows more about the other party's business than they do themselves. He understands their financial situation, their personal motivations, their family circumstances, their career objectives. It is like playing chess with someone who can see 15 moves ahead. None. By 2020, when Christopher turned 23, Davis Development had become one of the most respected firms in Chicago. The company had completed over 40 projects, employed more than 300 people, and generated annual revenues exceeding $60 million. Christopher himself had been featured on the covers of multiple business magazines, with headlines calling him the prodigy of real estate and the future of ethical capitalism. But Christopher was not satisfied with mere success and recognition. He had been quietly studying his father's business empire, identifying weaknesses and inefficiencies that a more experienced competitor might exploit. Robert Redford's company, once the undisputed leader in Chicago real estate, had grown complacent and careless in recent years, relying on past reputation rather than continued innovation. "Daddy's company is vulnerable," Christopher told Viola. One evening, in late 2020, as they reviewed financial reports in their new penthouse apartment, purchased with cash from Christopher's earnings. "They are over-leveraged on several projects, they have alienated key contractors with unfair business practices, and their reputation for integrity has been damaged by several high-profile scandals involving shoddy construction and cost overruns." Viola looked at her 23-year-old son, this remarkable young man who had somehow maintained his warmth and moral compass, despite carrying the weight of adult responsibilities since childhood. "Are you planning what I think you are planning?" Christopher's smile was gentle but determined, carrying echoes of the promise he had made 17 years earlier at his great-grandmother's funeral. "I'm planning to show Daddy what he lost when he chose his mistress over his family. I'm planning to demonstrate that the son he abandoned has become everything he pretended to be, but with the integrity and community focus he never possessed. And I am planning to accomplish this through superior business practices and ethical leadership, not through dirty tricks or illegal activities." The first direct confrontation came in March 2021, when both Davis Development and Redford Enterprises bid on the same downtown redevelopment project, a massive mixed-use complex that would reshape Chicago's skyline and was worth over $200 million. The project was considered the most prestigious development opportunity in the city's recent history. Christopher spent weeks preparing his proposal, assembling a team of the finest architects, engineers, and financial analysts in the country. His presentation to the City Planning Committee was a masterpiece of vision and practical implementation, outlining not just how the project would be built, but how it would serve the community for generations to come while generating sustainable profits. Robert's proposal, by contrast, seemed rushed and generic, the kind of cookie-cutter development that prioritized quick profits over long-term value and community benefit. When the planning committee unanimously selected Davis Development, Christopher had achieved his first direct victory over his father in the business arena. "This is just the beginning," Christopher told the assembled media after the announcement, his voice carrying quiet confidence that commanded attention. "Chicago deserves development that serves all its citizens, not just wealthy investors. That is what Davis Development provides, and that is why we will continue to win these competitions." By his 24th birthday in February 2022, Christopher had become the most influential businessman under 25 in American history. His company controlled assets worth over $400 million, had revolutionized urban development practices throughout the Midwest, and was expanding into national markets with projects in 6 different states. "Your son," the governor, of Illinois, told Viola during a state dinner honoring young entrepreneurs, represents the future of American capitalism. He is proving that business success and social responsibility are not just compatible, they are inseparable and mutually reinforcing. As Christopher approached his 25th birthday, his empire growing stronger with each passing month, Robert Redford remained largely oblivious to the storm that was gathering on his horizon, a storm that would soon sweep away everything he had built and leave him face to face with the son whose potential he had never bothered to recognize or nurture. Chapter 10. The Mansion Auction, Greatest Revenge. Justice, they say, is blind, but revenge has perfect vision, and Christopher's vision was about to become crystal clear to everyone who witnessed the final act of his long-planned reckoning. The notice appeared in the Chicago Tribune's business section on a cold February morning in 2022. Estate auction. Redford Properties to liquidate all assets. For most readers, it was just another story about a struggling business forced to downsize in challenging economic times. For 25-year-old Christopher, reading the paper in his corner office atop the Willis Tower, it was the moment he had been planning for since he was 6 years old. Robert Redford's empire, built over 2 decades of aggressive expansion and increasingly questionable business practices, had finally collapsed under the weight of its own corruption and incompetence. The Henderson Project, the same development that had supposedly required Robert's presence during Great-Grandma Rose's funeral 21 years earlier, had been exposed as a massive fraud involving inflated contracts, bribed inspectors, and substandard construction that endangered lives. Federal investigators had frozen Robert's accounts, seized his properties, and left the once mighty real estate mogul facing bankruptcy and potential imprisonment. "It is poetic justice," Viola said quietly, standing beside Christopher as they looked out over the city skyline from his office windows. At 53, she was more beautiful than ever, her face carrying the dignity that comes from surviving betrayal and raising an extraordinary son with grace and determination. He destroyed our family for that project, and now that project has destroyed him completely. Christopher, now 6 feet tall with his father's piercing blue eyes, but his mother's unshakable moral compass, studied the legal documents that had been delivered that morning. Robert's Lakeshore Drive mansion, the house where Christopher had spent his earliest years, where the family had been truly happy before everything fell apart, was scheduled to be auctioned to satisfy creditors and legal settlements. "I want to attend," Christopher said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him the most respected businessman in Chicago before his 26th birthday. "I want to witness the end of his story." The auction was scheduled for Saturday, March 14th, 2022, exactly 19 years to the day after Great-Grandma Rose's funeral. Christopher arranged his schedule carefully, ensuring that Davis Development's operations would run smoothly during his absence. He had built a company that employed over 1,200 people, controlled assets worth more than $1 billion, and had revolutionized urban development across 4 states. At 25, he was already being mentioned alongside business legends and was considered a likely candidate for major political office. "Are you certain about this?" Viola asked as they prepared to leave for the auction. Seeing him again, after all these years, watching his public humiliation, it might be more difficult than you expect. "I am not going to see him suffer," Christopher replied, adjusting his tie with the same precision he had shown as a 7-year-old, helping with household tasks. "I am going to witness justice being served. There is a significant difference between revenge and righteous consequences." The auction was held on the mansion's front lawn, with dozens of bidders and curious onlookers gathered beneath white tents that the auctioneers had erected for the occasion. The house itself looked smaller than Christopher remembered, though still impressive with its marble columns and perfectly manicured gardens that had been maintained even during the legal proceedings. News crews clustered near the entrance, drawn by the story of Chicago's fallen real estate emperor. Robert Redford arrived 30 minutes after the auction began, looking older than his 55 years and carrying himself with the defeated posture of a man who had lost everything he had worked to build. His hair, once perfectly styled, was now completely grey and unkempt. His suit, while expensive, hung poorly on his diminished frame. Beside him walked Bette Michael, her platinum hair now showing dark roots and her designer clothes unable to hide the stress lines around her eyes or the brittleness of a relationship built on success rather than love. Christopher and Viola arrived precisely as the auctioneer began presenting the main house. They emerged from a modest black sedan. Christopher had deliberately chosen his most understated vehicle for the occasion and walked quietly to the back of the crowd. Most of the attendees were so focused on the proceedings that they did not notice the young man whose business empire had, over the past 4 years, systematically outperformed Robert's through superior ethics and strategic vision. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer announced, his voice carrying across the lawn with practiced authority, "we now present the crown jewel of this estate, a magnificent 12,000-square-foot mansion featuring 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a library, a ballroom and 100 feet of private Lake Michigan frontage. Bidding will begin at $2 million. The crowd stirred with interest and anticipation. Several developers raised their hands as the bidding climbed steadily upward through $3, $4, then $5 million. Christopher stood motionless, his face revealing nothing, while Viola kept her hand firmly clasped in his. At $6 million, most of the bidders dropped out of contention. At $7 million, only 3 serious contenders remained. The auctioneer's voice grew more animated as the price approached $8 million, still well below the mansion's assessed value, but reflective of current market conditions and the stigma attached to Robert's name. It was then that Robert noticed them standing at the back of the crowd. Christopher saw the exact moment when his father's eyes found him among the spectators. Robert's face went pale, his mouth opening in shock as he took in the sight of his son, now taller than himself, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and carrying himself with the confidence of someone who owned the world. Robert's gaze moved to Viola, and Christopher watched his father's expression transform from surprise to something approaching devastation as he realized how beautiful and dignified his ex-wife had become. $8.5 million, called out a developer from the front of the crowd. $9 million, countered another bidder. Christopher waited until the bidding reached $10 million, then raised his hand slightly, a gesture so subtle that only the professional auctioneer caught its significance. $10.5 million, the auctioneer announced with obvious satisfaction. Do I hear $11 million? The remaining bidders looked around, trying to identify the new player who had entered the competition. When they spotted Christopher, whispers rippled through the crowd as people recognized the young entrepreneur whose success story had been featured in countless magazines and newspaper articles. $11 million, called out the final competing bidder, a corporate investment firm that specialized in distressed properties. Christopher raised his hand again, his expression never changing. $12 million, he said clearly, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. The corporate bidder hesitated, clearly unwilling to go higher against someone with Christopher's reputation and virtually unlimited resources. After a long pause, he shook his head and stepped back from the competition. $12 million, the auctioneer announced with satisfaction. Going once, going twice. $15 million, Robert suddenly called out, his voice cracking with desperation. Every head turned toward him in surprise. Everyone present knew that Robert was bankrupt. that this auction existed precisely because he could not pay his debts or legal settlements. The auctioneer looked confused and concerned. "Sir, I will need to verify your ability to complete this transaction before." "I can match any bid," Robert insisted, though his voice carried no conviction and his financial situation was a matter of public record. "This is my home, my life's work, everything I built." Christopher looked directly at his father for the first time in over a decade. Robert's eyes were pleading, desperate, filled with the sudden understanding of what was happening and what it meant for his legacy. For just a moment, the successful businessman facade cracked completely, revealing the broken man underneath who had traded his family for temporary pleasures. 20 million, Christopher said quietly, never breaking eye contact with his father. The crowd was completely silent now, understanding that they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple property auction. This was a reckoning 21 years in the making, a son claiming his birthright from the father who had abandoned him for a mistress and material success. Robert's mouth moved soundlessly. He had no more money, no more credit, no more options, or allies. Bet tugged at his sleeve, whispering urgently about leaving before their humiliation became complete, but he seemed frozen in place by the magnitude of his failure. $20 million, the auctioneer announced with finality. Going once, going twice, sold to bidder number 47. As the gavel fell, Christopher walked forward through the parting crowd to complete the paperwork. When he reached the registration table, he signed his name with the same careful precision he had learned as a child helping his mother pay bills. Christopher Davis, President and CEO, Davis Development Corporation. Robert stumbled forward as Christopher finished signing the documents. "Son," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "Christopher, I need you to understand." Christopher looked up at his father. This man who had once been his hero, who had chosen a mistress over his family, who had missed great-grandma, Rose's funeral for a business deal that had ultimately destroyed him. He felt no anger, no hatred, no desire for further revenge. He felt only the quiet satisfaction of a promise kept and justice served. The house will be donated to the Rose Davis Foundation for Community Development, Christopher announced to the assembled crowd and media representatives. It will serve as transitional housing for families rebuilding their lives after experiencing hardship, families like the one you abandoned 21 years ago. He turned to face Robert directly, speaking quietly so only his father could hear, the words that would haunt him forever. "You asked me once what I wanted to be when I grew up. I told you I wanted to be like you. I am grateful every day that I chose a different path and became the man you could never be." Christopher took Viola's arm and began walking toward their car. As they reached the edge of the crowd, he stopped and turned back one final time, his voice carrying clearly across the silent lawn. "By the way," he called out to Robert, ensuring that everyone present could hear his words, "I kept my promise to Mama. I told her not to worry because I was with her. I always have been, and I always will be. That is what real men do. They keep their promises to the people they love." As they drove away, Viola reached over and took her son's hand, with tears of pride streaming down her face. "Your great-grandmother would be so incredibly proud of you," she whispered. Christopher squeezed her hand gently, watching his childhood home disappear in the rearview mirror for the final time. "I know, Mama. I kept my promise to her too." Behind them, Robert Redford stood alone on the lawn of his former mansion, finally understanding the true cost of the choices he had made 21 years earlier. His son had not just become successful, he had become everything Robert had pretended to be, but with the integrity and compassion that Robert had never possessed. The boy who had promised his mother, "Don't worry, I'm with you," at his great-grandmother's funeral had grown into a man who kept his promises. And in keeping them, he had achieved the most complete revenge imaginable. Not through destruction, but by becoming so much better than the man who had abandoned him that the contrast was impossible to ignore. As the sun set over Lake Michigan, Christopher Davis, who had been born Christopher Redford but had chosen to honor the family who raised him with integrity, sat in his penthouse office reviewing the documents that would transform his childhood home into a beacon of hope for other families in need. The greatest revenge, he had learned, was not destroying your enemy. It was becoming so much better than them that they destroyed themselves simply by comparison.